When suffering comes, what questions do you ask and how do you handle it? In Job 1, as this pain and suffering starts to unfold with Job, in verses 20 to 22, we see a tremendous insight into how God's designed this to take place when we do experience suffering. And the first thing that Job did in verse 20, it says he fell to the ground in worship. And he said, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." And then verse 22 is so interesting to me. It says that Job did not sin by blaming God. When suffering comes our way, we have a tendency to want to blame God. But what God's inviting each one of us to do is to surrender the pain to Him, to worship Him, and to experience His restoration. Today you're going to hear a story of a remarkable woman who has worshiped God amidst the suffering. Hi, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where my guest today is my good friend, Audrey Hindle. Audrey, I'm so glad that you're here. We connected at Black Hawk Ministries, and you're the most incredible woman I've ever met in my life, and you've been through so much. And I just can't wait for the listeners to catch the unique expression of Christ in you. And I'd like you to start by telling about how you grew up, what your church life was like, and your family.
Well, I didn't go to church every Sunday. My mother worked a lot, and it was difficult to go. But I was raised in a Christian family. My grandfather was a minister, and we learned a lot from him. And, you know, we all kind of grew up, all of us cousins, there was 25 of us, and we all kind of grew up knowing each other and enjoying each other. And, you know, so sure. I was accepted the Lord maybe about 5th or 6th grade, and then baptized when I was 16.
How did your dads teach you to do so many things? Like, I don't think people realize when they walk into Black Hawk Ministries and they see this beautiful woman doing all this like construction type work and maintenance work, and how did your dad assimilate that into your life? Because I have not done that with my girls.
I was his gopher, and he could do just about anything. You know, he could paint, he could do woodwork, he could do whatever. Work on cars. You know, he was good. I feel comfortable here.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, that's good. So, and that's how you would spend time together, right? He would be working, and you do those things, and you learn how to do everything. It's just amazing. Well, fast forward, how did you meet your husband, Jim?
I organized a pickup hockey game about 11 o'clock at night.
You're playing the pickup hockey game?
I'm a goalie, my sister's a goalie, and I had all my guy friends come, and we played hockey for 2 hours at the Coliseum.
Incredible. So how long did you date before you were married?
About 5 years.
Oh, so you got to know each other really well.
Well, he was here at college, and I went away to school.
Where'd you go?
I went to Elkhart Institute of Technology, which is a medical technical school.
And he was working on an accounting degree and then CPA?
And certified financial planner after that.
So you guys get married, and you start having children, and Greg is your oldest. You have 2 other children.
Ryan and Lisa.
And Ryan's a big guy.
He's a big boy.
He is. And Greg, when he's 14,
correct,
is diagnosed with what?
Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We actually woke up on a Wednesday morning. He had been very busy. He had swum a swim meet. He had played basketball over at the school. He had rode his bike several miles, and he had a friend over that night, so they stayed in the family room. And when we got up, about 5:30, Jim goes out and runs, and Greg is crying as he's crawling up the stairs. And I thought, at a 14-year-old, and I thought, this is really serious if he's crying, and you know. And I asked him, well, what's the matter? And he says, my bones hurt. And he said his femurs, his large bones in his legs, and his sternum and his ribs hurt. And he had a headache. And Jim and I, you know, we've always been, well, we'll wait until the doctor's in. We'll see if there's anything that looks like this.
Right.
But when he came in from running, he always did his devotions on the front porch, and you know, cooled off on the front porch. And I went out there and I said, something's wrong with Greg, and I can't put my finger on it. And I have him in the bathtub right now, my remedy for, you know, all ailments. So I got myself ready, and the boy that was with Greg took care of our 2 kids. And Jim said, we're taking him to the emergency room because it was still before doctor's hours. And we took him in around 7:30, and they did blood tests and x-rays, and pretty soon the doctor comes in. He says, your general practitioner's on the phone. And so he asked me the same questions, and he says, I think we're going to do a bone marrow. Well, my medical mind was going, and I'm thinking, oh great, I know what this is all about. So Dr. Hill from Lutheran Hospital calls, and he said, we need to have you come over to Lutheran now. He needs to be admitted. So we went over there, and on the way down Randalia to Lake, I looked at Greg, and I was in the back seat, and I said, Greg, this is really serious. They don't keep leukemia patients here. They send them to Riley. And I want you to know that this is a very serious disease, and you can either glorify the Lord through this or rake him through the mud, and that's your choice. And I just left it at that. So we go to Lutheran.
Wow.
And he's admitted, and we were building a house at that time, and so there was just a lot going on in our lives. And so
at this point you realize it's leukemia. The doctors are telling you that. It's not just your diagnosis. Okay. So you got the call and you went to Riley?
Went to Riley for 10 days.
And what did they do?
They started him on chemotherapy right away. And they are only supposed to go for maybe 7 days, but he had an allergic reaction, and his blood problems were not taking, it wasn't taking the chemotherapy real well, so we had to put him on insulin. So he went to shot school and learned how to do insulin shots, and he never did give himself shots. I did, so.
And did he lose his hair, become nauseous? Did those kind of things happen?
He lost his hair. In the early stages, no, but right after Christmas, this happened in August the 2nd, and after Christmas he was starting into his rough chemotherapy, and that's when he lost the hair. And
at what point, or do they actually get it into remission?
They got it in remission right away, but 16 months later he came out of remission. And each time you go out of remission, it's a shorter period of time that you're going to remain in remission. So then they had to start looking for a bone marrow recipient.
How did you know he was out of remission? Was it a blood test, or were there other symptoms?
The white cells, you know, basically white cells grow to be teenagers, and then they don't go any further. And it expands inside your bone, and that's why he was having the bone pain that he had, because it expands the bone from the inside out. So, yeah, we were there, and then we went back, and at 16 months I was really upset when all of that came down again, and we were at Riley when they found out again. And so I just sat down with Greg and I said, you know, from the mother's top of my head to the bottom of my toes, I don't want you to go through this. And he says, Mom, I already have. And there's that perspective again.
Yeah.
He'd already gone through that. So, you know, he said, hey, you know, I've been there. I know what to expect now. So we start all over again.
It's interesting to me, the perspective that you're bringing in these conversations with him when you're in the car on the way to the hospital, and it's all about what you're going to do with God through all this. How are you going to reveal God's character and presence if you choose to? How can this be redeemed, in essence? And that's such a tribute to the work of Christ in you, to be able in a time where you just want to grieve, and that you actually even stop and have those kinds of conversations. So you're looking at coming out of remission, and you're having this conversation. What happens?
Well, and you know, he said, you know, we're going to go through this again. He was old enough at that point, he was almost 16, that he could call the shots. He knew exactly what was going on all through it. We didn't keep anything from him. You know, he said, hey, I want to know everything that's going on. So you can't do that with a 2-year-old, but you
No.
can certainly do it with a 16-year-old.
Sure. And what transpires physically then with him?
Well, he had to go through what we would call really rough chemotherapy to get ready for bone marrow. They did not find a 6 out of 6, and you need a real 6 out of 6 match. They found a 5 out of 6 match.
For bone marrow?
For bone marrow.
And is that a relative or just somebody?
We'd like to have a relative, but none of us matched when we were tested.
Wow.
So, you know, we had to go out. We found a man out in, I should say, the bone marrow coordinator found a person out in California, and we got his bone marrow. And it's really interesting when they do bone marrow. Usually the bone marrow coordinator will fly out, flew into Indianapolis, had a police escort forward and back, you know, in a limousine, and they took it to the hospital. They work on it, run it through the lab for about 6-8 hours at that time. I don't know what they're doing now, but then they give it to him in like a 60 cc syringe, IV, and it finds where it's supposed to go.
Amazing. Is he given anesthetic when that happens, or
Just an IV?
And is that
it's an
painful?
IV push? No.
It's not a painful process. And then you see whether or not it takes, and,
Right.
and how long does that occur?
It took him about 3 weeks, and we came home. And that was in April the 5th of '91. And then he came home, and then he went back in for about 7 weeks. So that was a long, hard, you know, road. I stayed home with the kids, and Jim was down there all the time.
In Riley? And what transpired in that 7-week period?
Well, he lost all of his intestines, you know, the graft versus host, which is recognizing something foreign in their body. And they want a little of that, but not a whole lot. And so he lost all of that. He was on IVs for months and months and months. And I did all of his IVs for him. I'd get up at 6 in the morning and fill all of his syringes and recalculate all of his IVs and, you know, start them. And I'd always have him off from noon until 6. So, you know, I worked it all out, all of his meds, so that he could be off for 6 hours.
And that was at home? So he came home from Riley. And what are his spirits like at that point?
Pretty good when he was feeling good. He didn't have quality of life that last year, you know, but his friends would come, you know. He couldn't go to school a lot of times. He'd have to be tutored.
And did he realize that he might see God on the other side soon and start planning for that? Or what was his perspective from that standpoint?
Oh, about 7 weeks before well, actually it was around when he relapsed. I talked to him. I sat down and I said, I don't know whether the Lord's going to bring you through this or you're going to be, you know, be in heaven. But I said, you could do your father and I a great service if you would plan your funeral. So in a 2-week period of time, he planned his funeral, who all of his soloists were, all of his scripture, what the pastor's, you know, message was going to be, the whole thing.
Incredible. And did you follow that plan?
Yes. It was like a play. You know, it was really kind of neat.
And you were with him on his last day at home, I assume?
Yes, and he actually died at Riley.
Okay,
He went down there 3 weeks before his death, and I was there with him and watching the nurses and standing in the ante room, which is halfway between his room. There was 4 doctors working on him, about 6 nurses in the ante room, and I was standing in between, and I was very calm, and I know that was God, you know. And I was looking at them to make sure that they were doing his compressions right, and they were going to put him on a ventilator, and I didn't know at that time whether they had an ambu bag on him, and I didn't know whether they had. And we talked about that because he was trying to finish his yearbook ending, because he was the yearbook, you know, editor, and he was trying to finish that. And I said, well, if they put you on a ventilator, you're laid back enough, I think you wouldn't outbreathe it. So I'll go ahead and, you know, but if you go on a ventilator, you may not be able to talk to me. So that means we're going to have to get an ABC board, you know, and to see if we could do it that way. But, you know, he didn't make it. And I just told the doctors after 20 minutes, I said, that's enough. And Jim was doing checking accounting things in his practice at Marion, and it took him a while to get there. But just as he died, I went and stroked his cheek and thanked the Lord for giving him to us for, you know, 17 years. And then I grabbed his Bible and just threw it open, and here's these highlighted verses in 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18, where it says, you know, I'm wasting away day by day. And then 18, it says, don't think on things temporary, think on things eternal. And I just looked at him and I said, you stinker.
Oh, wow. Rick Hawks, in a funeral sermon, said one time, a man goes to another man and says, give me the definition of joy. And he said, grandfather dies, father dies, son dies. And the guy goes, what? Why is that joy? And he goes, because when it's not in that order, it's chaos. And I imagine, you know, you had that time period to process all this, but still, I mean, it's painful. It's painful that it's out of order. What did that do to your relationship with Jim, your husband?
I actually was going through anticipatory grief. I was watching, I knew the medical signs, I knew all of that stuff, so I went through that pretty, you know, along with Greg. Greg and I did. Matter of fact, Greg and I had a conversation. He says, if anything ever happens to me, you're going to have your hands full with Jim and Grandma. And I said, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And it's true. He didn't start grieving until the day he died.
Jim.
You know, and I was pretty much through it. And he kept saying, how come you're doing so good? And I said, because I've been grieving all along. I've been watching the handwriting on the wall, and I see it. So he had a tough time. And Greg knew that his dad was going to have a hard time. And I think he was protecting him from a lot of things when I look back on, you know, back on it now.
And you have your other two children, and I imagine you got to kind of manage their grief. They're going to go through their own processes. Did that create any kind of tension in your home, or do you feel like there was like this harmony through it as you worked through it?
No, my son didn't really grieve for him right away. He didn't grieve until about 7 years later. And, you know, went to a counselor, and the counselor said, write a letter to your dad. And he wrote a letter to his dad and cried through it, you know. That's kind of how he handled it. My daughter, she had some, you know, problems, but, you know, she was Daddy's girl, you know. They went to donut shop together, rode their bikes, you know, and whatever, and yeah, and he could handle her.
I got 4 of those. I love that relationship. Well, Jim's active in his business. He's running every morning, right? And
every other.
He's running at the IPFW track, and we're like about 2 years from Greg's death. And kind of give me the scene of events as they unfolded that day.
Yeah, he usually woke up earlier than me. And he said, I'm going to go. And I said, okay, what time are you going to be home? He said, I don't know, 5:30 or 6. I said, okay, kissed me, and off he went. And then about 7, I get a phone call from Jerry Mahan, who I worked with sudden infant death, you know, years before. We set up the sudden infant death support group. And he called me on the phone from Parkview, and he said, they brought Jim in, and you need to come over to the hospital. I worked at Parkview. I knew what the protocol was. So I knew. And I remember standing in my closet looking at these clothes and thinking, what do you wear to a hospital when your husband's died? And so the kids both get in the car with me, and I'm backing out of the driveway, and I said, I don't need to be a widow at 43 years of age. And when we went to the hospital, Russell Moore, who was a pastor at that time, him and his wife met me there. And
how old was Jim?
He was 45.
And they tried to revive him at the track? And
they didn't have a defibrillator at the track.
couldn't
They had
do
to wait. First responder was a fire truck, and then the MS came. And by that time, it was too late because he was in V-fib, and he really needed a defibrillator.
So, Audrey, in a period of 24 months, you lose your oldest child, and you lose your husband, and you're in your early 40s. What do you say to God?
I learned not to ask why, because I knew that, even back then, I knew that he had a reason for that, because that wasn't the first death. In January of that year, we lost Jim's only sister to an automobile accident. So this was, and then my grandmother died in June, and then Greg died, 3 years later, and then Jim dies. So, it's like all of these things are happening. So, I just said, we got to go on from here. I learned from a book by Charles Stanley, How to Handle Adversity, and he said, do not ask why. You'll come to a dead end, because you may not know on this earth whether you will know the answer to that. But you ask, what is God going to teach you through all of this? And I've learned a lot through that, because, I'm able to talk to people and be relatively comfortable in death. Early stages is difficult as you get along. I'm 18 and 20 years away now, so it's a little easier for me to talk to people. And even now, when I do the funerals at Blackhawk, they know, most of the people know what I've been through.
Yeah, you organize those funerals. I remember one for an infant that you and I did, and any of them that we did together. I think about that they have no idea, some people have no idea what you've been through and who they have to come alongside them and restore them because of what you've been through. You have an amazing ministry at Blackhawk in that fashion. I mean, it's just incredible. God is taken what you've gone through and restored you through, and using you to restore others. And it's just it's a tangible picture of his comfort. Comfort means to come alongside and to strengthen together, and you come alongside and strengthen those in Christ. But when you had a couple stories that happened to you, and one of them was I think at Pastor Russ Moore's house after Greg died, right? Can you share that?
Yeah, Russell was revamping a whole house. It took 8 weeks to do that. So I was over there helping. It was good for me to do something with my hands. So I was over there the day after Greg's funeral, and I had my mother and a friend from Maryland and Jim and the other 2 kids with me, and we were stripping wallpaper in this one room. And they got finished helping Russell, and I came in and I said, I can't leave yet. I have to finish this room. And I said, give me 20 minutes. I'll have this room finished. So I'm scraping away, and all this wallpaper is just hanging, and I'm pulling it all off, and I get it all off. And I go to bed, and I'm sleepless. I cannot sleep. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still awake. And I said, okay, God, what is it you want to tell me? And in that few moments, the reality came to me that I know that you feel just like that room. You're gutted from the inside out. And, but I just want you to know, just as that room and that house is gutted, it's on a firm foundation. And I want you to know I'm the firm foundation. So then the next morning, I wake up and I'm sharing this. We had 45 minutes, my girlfriend and I, to sit on the couch and pray. And I was praying that and thanking God for that. And she's going, wow. She was going, wow. And I said it was such a awakening, to know that, he has the answers. He has the answers.
And you chose to remain single, and you raised your children. Were those first couple weeks without Jim really tough? Were they different, radically different from the week before? What was that like?
We We ate out a lot. We couldn't sit at the table without him being there.
Yeah.
It was just really tough. You know, so we had a island with 3 benches, 3 chairs, and that's where we sat if we had to eat at home.
And then were you trying to plan Jim's funeral, and Russ Moore was on a trip or something and had to return? What happened that day?
I was sitting on my bed, and I knew that I had one day that I had to put this all together before they came back. And I got my index card and my pen, and I said, okay, Lord, I have to have an idea here on what I'm going to do for Jim's funeral. I have nothing. And pretty soon I start writing, and I wrote, I do not want the pity of a newly born widow. I want the power of the resurrected Christ.
That came
That
just out of your mind to the pen?
And onto the pen.
Can you say it again?
I don't want the pity of a newly born widow. I want the power of the resurrected Christ. And it was the day, he died the day after Easter. So I said, okay, we're going to do the resurrection theme for his funeral.
Oh. And that's what you've done with your life. Audrey, you're an amazing, amazing woman. And I can't thank you enough for sharing with us today, but also for sharing Christ's restoration with others who have gone through what you've gone through. And we just love you to pieces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whatever's going on in your life today, whatever kind of suffering has come your way, I'd invite you to take this image of Audrey and apply it to your own life and not ask God why, but turn to who and what can I learn, as she said. Because God can take your heart and He can mend it and He can restore it. And it doesn't diminish the pain that you've been through, but He will use you to bring His restoration to others and help make them new again. And that's where we find our ultimate value, is when we're restored to authenticity and we bring His design to others and His restoration to others to help make them new. We invite you today to surrender in a prayer to God, to just say, God, I can't do this anymore, but You can. You can restore me and make me new. And I encourage you to go find somebody that's a little further down the road than you are spiritually and connect with them and share with them your journey, and let that be the beginning of the Word of God, the people of God, and the Spirit of God restoring you in order to bring Christ's restoration to others.